Hi, I'm Vanessa. Welcome back to the podcast. If you're considering a move to Portugal with your family, chances are that finding the right school for your children is one of your top priorities. And as we'll learn in the conversation that I'm going to share with you, finding the right school should be one of the very first things you focus on, even before deciding where exactly you want to live. So this is a really important part of this relocation process. So in this conversation, I'm interviewing Naomi, who owns Alesco. Alesco is a consulting service that can help international families figure out which school is going to be the right fit for them and helps them navigate that process. After my short conversation with Naomi, I talked to Sarah. Sarah is one of the education consultants at Alesco, and she and I go through a lot of the questions you likely have about the school system in Portugal, from how does the public system work to what are my other options if public education isn't going to be the right fit for my children, from costs to grade levels to everything in between. We covered all, and this is a very long conversation. So I've broken everything into chapters. If you want to skip ahead to the things that are most relevant to you, you can do that by clicking on the chapters below. Now, once you have figured out the school options that are going to be the best fit for your family, then it's time to think about housing. And that's where I come in. I connect international buyers with local, trusted English-speaking real estate professionals. If you click on my link in the description below, fill out my form, I can connect you to a real estate agent who can help you with your rental or purchase process wherever you are in Portugal or even in Spain. All right, without further ado, let's get into the conversations with Naomi and Sarah. Naomi, I'm so glad that we were connected because finding the right school for your children is a huge stressor and a big consideration when people are moving to another country. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Can you just give us a little introduction into who you are and how you got into this space?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for having me, first of all. It's a pleasure to meet you and hear about what you do and helping people as well. So my name is Naomi, and I've worked in education for over 15 years. And I relocated to Portugal in 2021 and realized that there was a lot of people who were relocating here who really didn't understand that they had other options available to them other than the closest local school. And they didn't know how to get into that local school. So even that was adding to the stress of the relocation. And as you mentioned, like oftentimes when you're moving, there's a lot going on. And I think one of the biggest things that people move for is they want their children to have a happy life. And such a big part of that is school. So finding the right school is really important and a big part of the challenge of moving. So I started out just quite casually talking to people who I met and ended up consulting on a kind of an almost verbal recommendation basis, letting them know that there were other schools and different alternative curriculums and how the Portuguese system worked. And then in 2023, I expanded the company to include other consultants whose knowledge base is far greater than mine. So we have people who've worked in the Portuguese private system for more than 25 years, the public system, the international school system. We've got people who are based in the north of the country, people based in Lisbon, and we've got a special educational needs consultant who knows the rules of the legalities of what you're allowed when you come here with a child who has extra needs. And we have a non-mainstream consultant who's homeschooled her 2 children here in Portugal. So it was really just kind of getting a feel for what the parents who were moving here wanted and needed, and then finding people who can support them with that so they can really find the right place for their family and take away one of those stresses.
Thank you for that. And I think what I want to highlight here, what I hear is there are so many different options in Portugal. You have, like you said, it isn't just the local school down the street. If you have a child with special needs, if you want to homeschool, if you're looking for international or private, those options are all available to you, but it can be hard to figure out which of those is going to be right for your child depending on their language needs, their school career goals, and so on. So when a parent comes to you, what is the process? What does it look like when they work with you?
So the first person they'll come into contact with is me, and I will do a needs analysis. And that would be very basically the area of Portugal that they're looking at. Some parents don't know that yet. They will actually decide where to live based upon the school that they find, the kind of educational goals that they have for their child. If they're looking at staying in Portugal long term, do they want to fully integrate into the Portuguese system? If they're looking at relocating again in another few years, would an international curriculum be better suited so that they can move with the schools that offer the same curriculum? So yeah, very basic needs analysis with me, and then I will align them with the best consultant for them. We have a range of packages, from a very basic advice and guidance call, which will just answer some questions and give you the information about the area of education that you're interested in, all the way to the full support, where we will help you to shortlist the schools, apply to the schools. We work with other third parties who can get you the documents translated and apostilled. So from the beginning to the end.
Okay. What about when children are getting closer to the university level? Do you have consultants who help them with that transition from high school into university?
We do, yeah. Two of our consultants also focus on universities, one of them on universities within Portugal and one of them on universities in the EU and UK. So they have experience with supporting clients into those applications as well.
Perfect. And do you start as young as preschool?
We do, yeah.
Okay. So from all the way from the beginning to the end of education, you can help guide people. Can you give, I know you have different packages, but just to give people a sense, what is the range of costs that they could expect if they worked with you?
Okay, so the very basic advice and guidance call starts at €150, and that's 1 hour of the consultant's time. That can either be a 1 hour call if you know what you want to ask, or it can be split into two 30-minute sessions where you can ask a few questions, go away and think about it, and then you can come back later or once you've processed and got some more questions. So that's €150, and then all the way up to the full package where we will give you the consultation and we will support you with the finding the schools, shortlisting the best schools that we recommend based on what you've told us, the areas that you are important to you, and then helping you with the application and the registration process. So making sure that the applications get in on time, the forms are filled in correctly, you've got the documentation, you're within the right time frame, the window, and that one is €1,250.
Okay. Fair enough. That's a lot of legwork to take off of somebody's plate. That's wonderful. And can you give me a sense of how competitive some of these schools are? I mean, we, as an American, we talk about signing your child up for preschool before you're pregnant to get a spot. What can you expect coming into Portugal with, say, a fifth grader? Are you going to be able to get them a spot?
So a lot of the answers that you will get in Portugal are, it just depends.
Okay.
So it can depend on the area of Portugal that you're planning to move to. It can depend on the kind of school that you're hoping to go to. Even some of the preschools, they have a program here, Creche Felice, which means that certain people are entitled to a free kindergarten place. So those kindergartens can fill up quite quickly. So that can be quite surprising that even in the smaller towns that are maybe quite rural, if they have a larger population of people who are eligible for that program, the kindergartens can get full. Whereas in some of the more less saturated places, or there's a lot of kindergartens around, you can be guaranteed to get a place in there. So it really can depend on what kind of school you're looking at, what kind of area and the location that you're moving to. In the public system, though, you will be guaranteed a place in a school. So your child won't be left without a school. It might not be the school of your choice. It might not be the closest one to you. So that's why it's advisable that you start the search early, start the application process sooner, and then, yeah, you can have a better chance at getting the school that you choose.
Okay. And what kind of a time frame should parents have in mind? So we're talking in May. If somebody wanted to move this summer and have their child in school in August or September when school starts, when should they be starting the application process?
And again, it just depends. If
depends.
you're looking at international schools, start
Yeah.
early because they will likely have a waiting list. So if you get on the waiting list early, when it comes around to the re-enrollment period, then they'll know the children from the waiting list will be moved into enrollment. So it's really better to not wait. And with the public school system, you can apply between April and July, depending on your child's school year. Again, it just depends on the age of the child. And for that coming September. So if you're going to relocate in May, you may have missed the window for your age group. But in that case, you'd have to then start contacting the schools directly. That can be tricky. They don't always reply. So that's why it's really good to have somebody who's got boots on the ground who can go into the school, maybe know some contacts in the local area. But yeah, start early. There's no harm in starting early. And then worst case scenario, you put on a waiting list, or you come back in a few months' time and join the appropriate window of application.
Right. So it sounds like if you're starting to research this move, and even if you're in the beginning steps, having conversations about the school system and kind of figuring out that piece is something you want to do early in your research process, because there's no harm in getting on the wait list. You can always decline
For
the
sure. Yeah.
spot if it comes up, but better sooner than later.
Right. The international schools, again, it will depend on your budget because some of them will charge an application fee. But if you understand the Portuguese system and you know, I'm sure that I want my child to be on the Portuguese national curriculum, public or private is both an option for me. Once you know that, then you can start to look at, okay, which area of Portugal has the schools that are meeting the standards that I want academically, has the options available for extracurricular. So it broadens your time to do the research into what is on offer. So even if you're not doing the application straight away, you know the kind of thing that you want to be looking for, and it can really help you to narrow down with your accommodation search. So yeah, it's good to get started early for sure.
And it can be overwhelming. So it's wonderful to have somebody who understands the system and can guide you through it, because it is such an important decision and it could be a big investment if
For
you're
sure.
going the private route. So
For
thank you
sure,
for
yeah.
doing what you do. And I understand that you're expanding. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's next for your company?
Yeah, we are hoping to roll out this summer so that we will take on some consultants based in Spain and Malta to start with, and then hopefully Greece, so the Mediterranean countries, which are having a high influx of expats and international families relocating there. And we're hoping to follow the same kind of business model that is really family focused and based on each individual client. And just like you said, we will get to know the family and make the list of school recommendations based on what we believe is right for them. We don't have any affiliate links with certain schools. We don't receive commission from schools. We listen to you, listen to your needs, and we will make our recommendations based on that. So,
Beautiful. Well, thank you. And up next, I'm interviewing one of your consultants, Sarah, and we'll be digging a lot more into all the things that we just talked about at a high level. So the different programs, costs, timeframes, all of that. So that'll be in the next part of this conversation. But how do people get in touch with you if they'd like to start a conversation?
well, we've got our social media sites, Facebook and Instagram, which is alesco.pt, alesco.pt. But you can also go directly to the website, which is www.alesco.pt. And there is a contact form there, which will send you directly through to me. Feel free to just get in touch if you have any questions to ask about the services, and I will gladly tell you more about what's available.
So the first thing, I think we should start with the public school system. And can we just start with broad overview? Can you explain how the public school system works in Portugal and what the
Yeah.
grade levels are, that kind of thing?
Okay, so children normally start school from the ages of 3 to 5 years old in preschool. And this is widely available, although it's not compulsory. So they don't have to go to school until they're 6 years old. So once they turn six, they go into primary school. So it's called the first cycle of school in Portugal. And they spend 4 years there. So from 6 years old to about 10 to 11 years old, they're in primary school. The year works, it's different. Yeah, it's a different system to in England, because England is from September. It's the academic school year of your age, whereas in Portugal, it's the actual year. So it's from January to December. So you'll find that a child that's born in December will be the youngest of the class once they turn 6. Although usually they will recommend that they stay 1 more year in preschool if they're turning 6 in December. Then you've got the second cycle. So the second cycle is year 5 and 6, so grades 5 and 6, and their ages 10 to 12, roughly. And this is when they will start having different teachers for different subjects. And now the schools are usually, you get the first cycle is a school on its own, and then they will move to a different school within the school cluster, which will have the second and third cycles. In Portugal, the school clusters are that there's one secondary school that's the main school, and then you have about 5 primary schools that belong to that secondary school. So that's how it works in Portugal. Then you have your third cycle, which is from year 7 to year 9. And the ages of the children are 12 to 14 years old. And this is when they start having languages like French, will be around this age. After year 9, they go into secondary. So the third cycle is classed as lower secondary, and so is the second cycle classed as lower secondary. Then you have upper secondary, which is ages 15 to 17, 18. And here they have a few different paths. You can go down the academic path, which you can choose the areas you want to go into. So humanities, sciences, arts, or you have the vocational. So where you can actually go and do these 2 years in, if you're interested in tourism or in health, or you want to be a mechanic or an electrician, then you have specific courses that you can go to finish your secondary education, which is, here it's called 12º, would be the last one before university.
Okay. So for children who take the vocational path, is there a additional education after they finish high school or that third cycle, or are they done and ready to start work at 18, let's say?
Usually they're done and ready to start work, but if they change their mind and they want to go to university, there is an access where they can do the exams. I'm not 100% sure how they enter into that, but there is a system where they can do an exam that will then allow them to apply to universities. But normally, students that pick this already kind of know the area of work that they want to go into.
And so for students who are preparing for university, are there end of year exams? In the United States, we have the SATs, for example. Is there a similar process to qualify for university?
Yes, there's the national exams. So they will have them in year 9. And then they will also have them in 12º, which is the last year of upper secondary as well.
And how important or instrumental is that exam to their placement in university? So in the United States, right, we have the SATs, but that's one part of their bigger picture, their extracurriculars, their volunteer work, other accomplishments factor in. How does that work in Portugal?
No, I think here it's a little bit more traditional. I mean, in England, it's also slightly different to here. Those exams are very important for them to get into universities. And you find that the universities here, you've got the public and the private. And this is opposite to England as well. And you'll find that the private schools are for the kids that couldn't get into public schools. So the public universities are classed as better, and the private ones are usually more expensive, but the education isn't as rigorous as the public.
So it's very merit-based. It's, can you pass the test at a high level? And if you do, then you'll get a spot in one of the public universities, and those are the best universities. And that's kind of
it's
the goal.
Extremely test-based.
Okay.
So even in primary school, all the way up their education, I've got my comparison. All my education was in England, and I've worked in international schools, but my children are actually in public schools as well. So I've got very good understanding between the differences between the two, as a teacher and as a parent. And they're always having tests, so it's very summative assessment rather than formative assessment, which is what we do more in England, I think. Although they do still they don't just grade them on their exams, they do grade them also on the effort they've made, and that comes into their final mark as well. But that's throughout primary school and lower secondary.
Okay. Got it. And so I'm really interested to compare private education test scores to public education test scores. So I want to put a pin in that. But first, when are they taught English in public school in Portugal, and when do they start English education?
Yeah, they're taught English from year 3, but it's English as a second language. So you find that international students in the Portuguese system, it's a really difficult one because we're getting more and more international students. In Portugal, obviously, you have Portuguese as a native language, and then you get offered Portuguese as a non-native language. I almost feel that there's something missing here where we should be having possibly English as a first native language to pull those students out of that, but it's not offered. And someone like me isn't allowed to go into the public system unless I was employed in the public system to offer that kind of support. Whereas in the private system, I do actually teach English students who are in private Portuguese schools. The schools have allowed them to come out for English, and I teach them the English curriculum in those lessons.
Right. This is definitely a consideration for parents, because when your English speaking child goes into that third grade English class, they're learning their colors and their numbers, and they're bored to tears.
Exactly.
They're not progressing, and then you can see their grammar and their spelling just fail because they're not getting pushed ahead in their English education.
There's no phonetic. So a lot of the times what I'm doing when I work with these children is giving them the phonetics so they can then read in English really well, and then bringing in the grammar as well. But this isn't something that schools understand yet or have thought about, I think.
Because they're geared toward Portuguese families and not the international families that are, or the English speaking families that are coming in. Yeah.
There's such a big boom that I don't think teachers here actually understand what to do with international students, because it's something that they're just not used to.
Okay.
So there's a big learning that's happening in terms of how do you teach someone that doesn't speak your language and you don't speak their language.
Yes. And is there support? So it sounds like there's not a lot of support for non-Portuguese students when they join the public school system. So let's say a fifth grader is put into Portuguese class. Is there support for Portuguese as a second language students?
There is support. Yes, it's called PLA, and it's for Portuguese for non-native speakers. But it varies. It varies from region and it varies from schools. So you'll find that there possibly may be more help down in the regions of Lisbon, and maybe the cities like Porto and Lisbon and Cascais, because there's such a high number of international students that there's more funding. Whereas I've lived in both. So I lived 15 years in Lisbon, in Cascais near Lisbon, and now I'm living up north. And what I find is you're up north and nobody speaks English. Everybody understands it, but they're very reluctant to speak it. So the support a student may get in the north of Portugal will be different to what they could get in the big cities or more towards Lisbon.
Right.
But they are I'd say about 2 to 3 times a week, they're pulled from the Portuguese lessons to have Portuguese as a non-native language.
Okay.
But they're still submerged into Portuguese with everything else. So their maths, there'll be vocabulary in maths that they still have to learn. I always think that the first year or so of a child coming from another country should be just focused on learning the language. And because before you speak it, you have to, like you possibly know, being in Italy, you have to hear it, and then you have to start understanding it. And the speaking is the last thing that happens.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely an amount of time needed to understand the culture and to learn the language, and almost think, well, I'm not going to be learning maths and I'm not going to be learning science because they're requiring so much more.
Yeah, they have to get the language first. And, I experienced that with my son. We speak English and Italian at home. We moved to southern Spain when he was 1.5 or 2. Then we moved to Catalonia at 2.5. And so he was learning Spanish and Catalan in school, along with English, and speaking English and Italian at home. And he's not a language kid by nature. So this was a lot for him. And so he really wasn't speaking at school, and the English kids would translate for the teacher. And then one day we get this excited note from school. He'd been in school for a year, and she said, all of a sudden, he just started speaking Catalan today. Full sentences. Everyone was so excited. Today was the day. He just decided to start talking. And, it took a long time. We were concerned. Do we need therapists? What's going on? And he just needed his time, and then boom. And now he's, fluent in 4 languages. But it's a journey. Probably easier when they're little versus when they're older.
Journey. And I think I've had that because I spoke Portuguese at home in England. I was born in London. I spoke Portuguese at home, and then I went to school and I didn't speak any English, which I don't remember learning. And so I spoke English with my friends at school, Portuguese at home. And then we came to live in Portugal. And I've got 4 children. 3 were born here, but they speak English at home and Portuguese at school. So it's the opposite of me. But at the same time, there's a never going to speak the English of someone who's born in England and goes to an English school, but they're not quite going to speak the Portuguese of a native Portuguese because we speak English at home.
It's a blessing and a challenge. I won't call it a curse, but there's this thing that happens with bilingual or multilingual people where there's like basic words that you just can't recall, like the table, right? Just, and then you get the mix. So I'll see my husband and my son will speak to each other, and it's just like a round robin. If they're out in public, people are so confused. What is this? What language are you speaking? Pick one. But it's such a beautiful thing to be able to flow into these different conversations and pick the word that has the best meaning for what you mean to say. I'm very jealous because I struggle. I speak English and I struggle with the rest of it. But I think it's worth the challenge for sure. But it's definitely a journey. It takes extra work, and there's patience, and just, there's a process that you have to accept.
Definitely. I think it's an understanding that there is a process, and they shouldn't really be compared to a native Portuguese, but they also shouldn't be compared to a native English or the country, their mother tongue also.
Yeah. Do you get this? I get this thing where my son will speak English, but with Latin grammar. So he sort of sounds like Yoda. It's like backwards. But he says it with a perfect American accent, which kills me, because if you have an accent, you forgive people for poor grammar. But if you sound like me, but you put the verb and the noun the wrong way, it just sounds awful. Do you see that?
Now, there's one that my daughter says all the time that sounds so funny, and I always switch it for her. But they do the same with Portuguese, which I know I do. I know that when I'm translating, I will get things the wrong way round. But as long as people understand me.
Yeah. Well, and I think in Europe, we're so used to it. We're so used to people who speak multiple languages, and they're going to be flubs, that it's, nobody really raises an eyebrow. It's okay.
No,
maybe.
I think so too. I think, I was always really embarrassed to speak in Portuguese because my cousins would just laugh so much at everything I said wrong. So I was really conscious of myself. But then I've lived here now 20 years, so that's kind of gone. But yeah, I used to say like the officio. Where's the officio? Which means it's office, but obviously the word in Portuguese is not officio. It's a completely different word. You make up the English word and you make it sound Portuguese, and you hope it's Portuguese.
In America, we call that Spanglish. So when Americans try to speak Spanish and you just add an O at the end of the word, make it sound Spanish. Yeah. Absolutely. So an expat family moves to Portugal. Are they guaranteed a spot for their children in a public school?
Yeah, absolutely. They are guaranteed a spot, but not necessarily their first choice. So they get a choice of 5 schools, and usually it's within their residency area. And then it depends. I mean, if you're, if you're in an area that's not as in high demand, like if you're out of the cities, more than likely you'll get your first choice. But if you're now living within Porto, Lisbon, even Braga is beginning to boom with the amount of expats coming over, Americans and Brazilians coming over. So the schools are becoming more difficult to get into in terms of the first choice. But otherwise, they absolutely guaranteed a place. Yeah, by law, they have to.
What are the hours for the school day?
That varies. That's a complicated one.
Okay.
Primary school, usually very basic. So the first cycle, usually it's 9 o'clock till 4 o'clock. You may have a day that would be 9 o'clock till 5:30, and then on one of the days they may finish at lunchtime, depending on the curriculum. And now from year 5 onwards, it is half day. You can have half day from 9 to 1:30. Or you can start at 1:30 until 5:30. Or you can have your whole day from like 9 to 4:45 with a break in the middle. So it varies a lot. It's quite a challenge to juggle, but usually a lot of children or students will end up doing like homework clubs, or because parents are working, so they'll end up sort of going to these centres where they do homework and learning activities as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Or they can hang out in school. I mean, this is more the public schools I'm talking about here.
Right.
This is not the international schools. The international schools are usually normal, like it would be in England, 9 to 3:30 or 8:30 to 4. It sort of varies on that. That the public schools are that the students will start and finish at different times. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that does make a challenge for working parents, doesn't it? We see that in Spain as well. And in Spain, they have these huge lunch periods. You got to pick them up, take them home, take them back, come back in an hour and a half. It's like, what? And how are school lunches handled? Is that part of what's paid for, or do you pay for school lunches extra? Are children able to bring a lunch if they have allergies? How does that work?
Yeah, they can bring a lunch. Yes, they can have packed lunches, and sorry, I'm thinking of the word in Portuguese. They're on a escalão, so low-income families won't pay, and then you've got like it goes up where it's about 70 cents per lunch on the second escalão, on the second level of earnings, and then the next one is the full payment, which is about, in the public schools, it's about €1.50 a day.
That's great. That's really reasonable. And how are the lunches regarded? Are they considered high quality, or are they like American style?
No. Gosh, no. I would say high quality in terms of there's always soup, there's always a main meal, and there's always fruit. And usually I think they can pick between fish and meat. I'd say that they would struggle probably with vegetarian options or vegan options. That's something that's not really popular. But that will be different in international schools again, and the prices are different in international schools. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. So if the public school system, sorry, one more question about public school system. How are the schools regarded? I mean, in terms of the quality of education and the quality of the environment?
I would say there's a difference between Lisbon greater area, like around Lisbon, and up north. And I'm not sure if it's to do with that down around Lisbon, there's so many private schools, private Portuguese schools. And in the last 5 years, I think we have 30 international schools. There used to be pre-COVID 5, I think it was, not many. So after COVID, sort of 2020, the last 5 years, the boom of international schools is really big. Whereas up north, we just don't have, we have 2 main international schools in Porto. We have one that's bilingual. We have a French and a German. And in Braga, we have one international school, which is English. And then you've got private Portuguese schools. So I think what you find is that sort of up the north of Portugal, you have a mix of different children and families from different walks of life in the same school, because everybody goes to the same school, which is kind of what it used to be like for me in England. Everyone went to a public school, only your sort of very, very middle class, like, you talk about Eton or would be going to private schools, but it wasn't common. And you find up north, I find it's the same, that it's not common for parents to put students into the private schools because there's not as many up here.
Okay. So you have a more diverse student body, which means that you have more parents who are likely involved in their children's education. So you're
within
probably
the public schools.
In the public system. But when you get into the Lisbon area, there's more stratification. You have parents who can afford to send their kids to private or international schools go there, and then you have more of the lower socioeconomic students are left to the public school system.
Which then the quality of the school is different.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the other options. So if you are looking at international or private or homeschooling, what are the other options for parents in Portugal?
Yeah, there's so many options here. There really is. We've got schools now that are opening that are Montessori. We've got forest schools that are opening. You do have the options of homeschooling. You can do it under an umbrella school, or you can you always have to register in with the Portuguese state system, because you need to have a qualified teacher overseeing the homeschooling as well. But I don't know too much about the ins and outs of the homeschooling, although I do teach a few students that are homeschooled as well, that are trilingual as well, that sort of have all the languages and the parents supplement everything for them. Sorry, I've lost the question.
So we have private and we have international. Can you describe the difference between the two?
Well, the international schools usually have an international curriculum. So you're looking at curriculums like IGCSEs, IB. There's a couple that do A-level, but A-levels aren't as common. You're going to get the Cambridge IGCSE and you're going to get the International Baccalaureate as the curriculum for international schools. The private Portuguese schools work on the Portuguese national curriculum. Yes, so they'll follow the same curriculum, but they just have like less traditional methods of teaching in the private schools to the public schools.
So maybe more group activities or multiple topics, projects, that kind of thing, versus like a classical curriculum that follows workbooks and every subject is separate. Would that be, would you consider that?
Yeah, they've got more funding as well, so they'll have more resources. Public schools will vary between what resources they have depending where they are. So yeah, so the Portuguese private schools is the national curriculum, and then the international schools will be international curriculums. And then you've got your French and German that will follow the French curriculum and the German curriculum.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about getting your child into the best university to support their career goals in the future. So if you're starting with a third grader and you're looking to the future, how do you help parents decide which avenue is going to be the best fit for that child?
Well, I don't always think academics the way to think. So, I think that, and there's so many things you can supplement their education with outside of school. And there's so much on offer here in Portugal as well, with sports, with arts, with languages, music, choir, instruments. You also, actually, I forgot to say, you also have the option in year 5 of having an integrated education where they do music as part of the curriculum. So my daughter, for example, doesn't do music in school, but there's a music school that's linked to the second cycle, because they have it in the second and third cycle, where she does music lessons, choir, and an instrument, and it's all part of the curriculum. So yeah, so that's quite, you find that a lot of people follow sort of a music path here as well.
In terms of thinking about the right schools, so the Cambridge system or the IB program or the Portuguese national?
Yeah, I think it really depends on your child. Like, if your child has very specific needs, you need to really think about, is it good for them to submerge them just in Portuguese and have to have a year or two in that environment where they don't understand and they're trying to get into the culture and the language? Or do you give them a bilingual school where they've got a bit of a mix of both, which means that they'll have a mix of both kinds of students too, so the connections they can make are a little bit easier? And then you've got, are they academic? Are they sporty? If they're sporty, then yeah, the public schools do offer really great, they value the sports. Up north especially, I think up north you've got canoeing clubs, you have running clubs, you've got football clubs. There's a really big, I feel there's a really big push for sport as well up here. So I would almost begin with, what do they like and what type of learner are they? Because a lot of parents maybe want them to be academic, but academic doesn't mean it has to be in the traditional sense of being good at maths and science. There's so much more to learning now that we can kind of guide our children. For example, my daughter's really good with the arts, so I've put her into an adult sewing class. She's making a dress. And from making that dress, she's actually learning a lot of maths because she has to measure everything. So I'm thinking, wow, this is great because it's how I feel maths should be taught, So you can kind of just find things that complement, but also maybe be very aware of what makes your child happy, I suppose, isn't it? Especially with especially with mental health and mindfulness and the kind of life our children have. It's a really different world to what we had. And I think that the focus for us as children was academic because it's the way the world was. You get your degree, you do this, you get a job, But for our children, not that we know what their future is going to be like because everything's changing so much. But I think we almost have to nurture their well-being also, and find a school that values what makes them happy and what makes them confident so that they can progress.
I'm glad that you brought that up. So as you're thinking about preparing your child for the future, and these tests are so important to get them to this next stage, how do you think about that, and how much pressure how much do you invest in preparing them for those assessments to get them to that next stage?
If I'm speaking as a mother, I think it's irrelevant. If I'm speaking as a mother, tests mean nothing to me. And the stress I see upon the students or my children is something I really try and take away from them because I just don't think it's worth it. There's no such thing as failure. And because we have access to education in so many different ways, we have online courses, online masters, the access, our parents went to school. My mum didn't. So we're already a generation where we've gone through the whole school system. Most people have degrees, which means most parents have a higher education. So they're also teaching their children. That didn't exist before. So I like to think of education and learning as it's a wider thing now. It's not just school. Yeah, I just think that even if they failed school, there's just no such thing as failure. You can redo the exam, you can still go to uni, you can kind of find your way. If it's not like this, I just believe you can sort of go like this, and if the school's not right, you can find another school. Whereas you couldn't really do that before. Like parents, you went to that school, and that's where you stayed. Whereas now, I think if you can feel that it's not the right environment, you're able to change them or look for something else. And we have that.
Right. So as somebody let's say somebody wants to move to Lisbon, they're spoiled for choice, so many different schools. How do you help them navigate figuring out which schools are going to be the best fit for their child?
It's finding out a lot about the child's interests, if they know what kind of learner the child is. So, if they already have things in mind that they really enjoy or that they want to achieve. And then you have to look at the schools and what they offer in terms of the curriculum. Like the IB, for example, is a really heavy. It's brilliant because it prepares you for university. It's almost like you've done a year and a half of university if you go through the IB. But a child that's possibly dyslexic, I would think that the IB wouldn't suit them because they're going to struggle, not through all the subjects, but through many of the subjects. So then you think, okay, do you look for a school that has A levels where you can focus on 3 or 4 subjects of your interest? So it's really trying to understand the family and the child and their individual needs.
So let's talk about costs. Is there a difference in cost between a Portuguese private school and the international schools, and what should parents expect?
Yes, there is. The private Portuguese schools are very affordable. You can find really affordable private Portuguese schools. You're looking at from maybe 3,000 to 8,000 a year, depending on what school you choose. And then you've got the international schools that can range between 10 to 20,000 a year. And sometimes they go up in price. IB is normally the most expensive. So your 20,000 bracket is normally the last 2 years of IB.
Okay.
Yeah,
and that's because you're paying for the curriculum, or, is there the difference in the quality of the teachers or the experiences that they have? Like, what are you getting for that?
Yeah, I think both. And I think you need to be careful the quality of the teachers as well. There's international schools here. In Portugal, you don't need to be regulated to be called an international school. So there's also research to be done behind the school and how the school's been formed, because you could just put the name in front or after your name. So it's what kind of teachers they employ. Are they employing, English qualified teachers, or are they employing Portuguese teachers that speak English very well? Straight away there, you're going to get a different a different quality of teaching or a different background of teaching. An international school should really have international teachers from America, England, Australia, English-speaking countries, Canada. If you've got these teachers coming in, then the school is going to be giving a more modern, wider curriculum with different strategies coming from all these teachers that they bring. But if you've got an international school, the Portuguese international, where teachers speak English well, but have had all their education in Portugal, then you're almost getting the same as a private Portuguese school, but just English speaking. Yeah.
So, okay. And so we're anywhere from 3,000 to 20,000 a year. That's a big range. But on that below 10,000, I would say if you're coming from the United States or probably the UK, you've probably paid more than that in childcare in a year. So that sounds incredibly reasonable. And well, let's talk about those tests. So at the end of the day, they all have to take the same national exams if they want to go to a Portuguese university. How do these different schools stack up in terms of their competitiveness for students who want to go to university?
What do you mean?
Well, so are the test results better for students who are in an international school versus a Portuguese public school? How are we in terms of their, like, the end result, if we're grading them on that assessment, which I know there are problems with that, but if that's how they get into university, how are these students performing in these different types of schools?
Yeah, usually students that go to international schools will go to schools abroad. Some do stay, but normally in the international schools, they apply to schools in England or elsewhere. Not a lot of students stay in Portugal. So there's a different market, you know, depending what universities you're applying to as well. Whereas the Portuguese will be applying to Portuguese universities. So I'm not sure if I can compare them exactly. In my experience, they're looking for different markets, both of the different students. You may get some that then do Erasmus, but not many Portuguese students will end up going to a university abroad, unless they're languages or they're learning languages and then they go to the
So
different
that's a really
countries.
interesting distinction, I think, because if you're an international family and you're coming to Portugal and sort of your expectation is your child will go to school wherever they want in the world because you're international, like you're not tied to the Portuguese system, having them in a Portuguese public school where all their colleagues, their school colleagues are going to be testing into a Portuguese university and that's like what they're being prepared for, may not be setting them up for the path that at least you're envisioning for them. They could decide they want to go to a Portuguese university. I don't know. But what I'm hearing is you could be maybe limiting their options a little bit by not setting them up to be in an environment that's preparing them for international university.
Yeah, I mean, there are now universities in Portugal that have English speaking courses. So they could end up going to, and I'm sure that's going to be more and more. But for example, my first child, my daughter, went through the International Baccalaureate and everybody went abroad. Although the majority, and she went to a very, very good international school, brilliant curriculum. She's very academic, so it suited her completely. But nearly everybody ended up in England, and she decided to go and study in the Netherlands because she didn't want to go to England to study, which is great. I mean, but they're everywhere. So her friends are no longer in the little hub of Cascais, which socially, I think, is quite difficult or was quite difficult for her. So especially with students coming and going, and when you're international, you're used to it. But sometimes for a child, you make a friend and then they're gone. And then you make another friend and then they're gone. So my reason for putting my other three into the public system, which the education system is just, it doesn't compare. I'm not going to say it's not as good, but it's so traditional still, you know, where you're looking at 50 years ago and that's the way it's very much a dictatorship and that everyone follows the same page. Next. If you don't memorize it, it's a fail. So for me, that side of things is very difficult, but I wanted them to have roots because we're staying. So I wanted them to have friendships that live in the area. Possibly most of them are going to stay, you know, and they have that sort of base for life. So that's why I made the decision to keep them in a public school and to really sort of get some roots into Portugal. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so interesting. There's just so many considerations. And like you said, it's so personal. It's so dependent on the child and your situation and what
Yes.
year they're coming into the school system. It's much easier with a 3-year-old than it is with a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old. I mean, you're going to make a different decision based on their language skills and where they are. As families are considering their relocation to Portugal, how early in the process should they start looking at schools or putting in applications?
Yeah, putting in an application. Yeah, I would say at least a year to year and a half. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, with the public schools, you have to do it when the dates open. So you don't have to have that consideration. But the private schools, already starting the inquiries, knowing what you need and everything, I would be at least 12 months in advance. Yeah.
Okay. And let's say a family started in one system and then wanted to change from private to public or public to private. How easily does that translate for a student in terms of what they're learning at these different stages?
Yeah, I mean, I've got experience with a lot of families that want their child to learn Portuguese, so they put them into a Portuguese school. You do have a few schools that have both curriculums, which I think are beneficial. That they teach the Portuguese national curriculum and they have the international side of the school. So they could start in the private Portuguese to be able to learn the language and really submerge them, and then they can switch into the international. I would say starting in the international and going the other way would be extremely difficult, not just culturally, but not being able to access the curriculum as well. And going backwards, I wouldn't advise it. But the other way around, many families do that. Many families will start, or they'll do the first cycle in a Portuguese school, and then they put them into international schools.
Okay.
Or they do the second cycle in a Portuguese school and want them to do the IGCSEs and IB in an international school, which then sets them up for university.
And I think this is a really interesting point that you're making because I think, at least in the United States, a lot of parents invest in private education up to high school and then they put them in public high school. And so because the classes are smaller and it's very expensive and maybe there aren't as many options, and a lot of private schools end at grade 8 in the United States.
Okay.
So what you're saying is really you would want to think about it another way around. Public school first, kind of save your pennies, and then invest in private education for those final years to prepare for university.
Yeah, definitely. That would definitely be the way to do it, not the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So do you think, are there any misconceptions about schooling in Portugal that you hear from parents that you'd want to clear up?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. Any misconceptions? The bureaucracy here is different and the paperwork can be very confusing and really difficult. And your emails won't be answered. And, and I think it's a cultural thing. It's not personal and it can be very frustrating when you come from a country that, things are done, you answer emails and you get back to people. That doesn't really happen here. So that can maybe leave you feeling a little bit lost or misunderstood.
I think your point about not having emails responded to and sort of the pace of things is a really important point, because there might be a wonderful school, you send an email, you don't hear back, you think, oh, well, they don't have their act together, and you could miss an opportunity. Where if you're working through a service like yours, where, you're going to reach out and help them navigate, like you're going to be able to bring them into the fold a lot easier than if they were trying to do it on their own.
Yeah, it's the cultural differences. I think you can misinterpret absolutely that they're either being rude or it's the same as when I first came here. Actually, people used to still smoke in banks. I remember thinking, oh, there was ashtrays in banks. But I would walk into a bank or a shop and they would get on the phone and I'm standing there waiting to be served or for them to acknowledge me. They wouldn't acknowledge me. They'd be talking to their friend about what they were going to get for dinner and I'd be like, oh my goodness, I was about to explode. But what I realized is I was expecting the English way, like you have customer service, like you don't go and speak to your friend if there's a customer. But I think it's not as bad, but there's still an essence of no rush. So to get in contact with schools, it's ongoing persistence. You have to be almost what maybe an American or an English person wouldn't do is you've got to be almost like a bit of a pest.
Okay.
Otherwise you're not going to get response. You have to be constantly phoning or emailing so otherwise it won't happen. It just won't get done.
That, I think, is a big takeaway. Don't just send that one email and let it go. So are there any recent changes or upcoming reforms to the education system that expat families should be aware of?
Well, they've got really good policies for inclusion, and that every child has the right to an education. I just think that it really varies from school to school. They have really great Erasmus programs that happen. There's a lot of Erasmus programs interlinking international schools with schools in Portugal. I sometimes work on some of these as well. So you've got loads of different countries and you focus on different areas like coaching, teachers, mindfulness. So yeah, there are some really lovely projects that happen. But again, it really does vary on the school and the area that you're looking at. Yeah.
So I think the big takeaway here is start early, start with the schools while you're trying to figure out what area you want to move to, and then kind of work on housing and the rest of your visa paperwork and all of that, because this is such an important piece and it's going to impact your family so much that if you're moving to Portugal with a family, start with education and then kind of build out the rest of your plan around that.
Yeah, and then even think about, we had an American family that started school with my son here, and I live in the very north of Portugal, so no one really speaks English up here. But I felt really sad. He was so lost. And I asked the school, the parents asked if I could be like a mentor, sort of a coach. And for me, I almost feel that there's just something missing where families move over and they think that the child has the language to learn and the culture to get used to. But I feel that if there was a support network of someone that could just coach them emotionally through, it's hard for us as adults, but I almost feel like there should be a sort of safe person or place that they can go to talk about things that are happening in school and sort of navigate their journey with support. That's not really happening. And I think that's a really big one. So if there could be a coaching sort of service for students, and it doesn't have to be always, it could be just at the beginning, or it could be, a few weeks in the middle, but to sort of understand that they might need a bit of support.
Yeah, and remembering as parents, like we're making this decision and they have to go along with it. And this is a huge change for them and we have more perspective than they do. And especially if they're in elementary or bigger, like little ones, it's easier. But once they've made friends and their whole environment is changing, it is a big transition. I think at the end of the day, most people you talk to who moved as children look back on it fondly and it was a great experience for them. But that doesn't mean that it was easy in the transition. So I think that's a wonderful point to end on is, think about the whole health of your child and helping them navigate this transition in a way that's like gentle and supportive for them.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're leaving all your support network and they're leaving their support network, which is their school, their friends, their doctor, the shops, the local shops, everything they know is now it needs to be built again here, or in the new country that they're going to. And that takes a while.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you so much. This was such an insightful conversation. I learned so much. I know that our listeners did as well. And of course, I'll have all of Alesco's information in the description. So if anybody's interested in talking to Sarah or Naomi about schools in Portugal, these are the people to talk to. Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you again to Naomi and Sarah for sharing their insight and experience. Please reach out to them if you're looking for schools in Portugal. And don't forget to reach out to me when you're ready to find your dream home in Portugal so that I can connect you with an English-speaking trusted real estate professional to help you with your journey. And until then, keep traveling, keep exploring, and keep living the life you dream about.